think before we start, I would like to have a sense of who is here. And so, how many of you are music or music students? Just raise your hand. Okay, quite a few. Most of you actually. And engineers, computer sciences, mix of both. Okay. So thank you very much to Carlos Guedes and M4M for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to bring you a few of the things I've been doing in the last year or so, and in particular a piece that we will be performing at the end of the session with Miquel, and hopefully will be open into a kind of informal workshop that you can ask questions to him, maybe try the instrument if that's a possibility, and so on. But the idea of composing and creating digital media for such an instrument like the Chopitimbila of Mozambique is something like I never attempted to do before. So I never worked with ethno or any kind of instruments with cultural, heavy cultural baggage. So it was a bit of a challenge. But I will discuss this a little bit more in a minute. So first of all, to give you a sense of what we are going to go through today. So I want to talk about the, not just composing a piece and thinking about the context and responding to it, but actually projects where I have been creating the context within the context, if that makes sense. And it's a bit laborious, it's something probably I don't recommend composers to do, but this is something I've been doing in the last few years. And then I want to talk about my relationship between the music and the performers. How I found this an opportunity for you to go beyond the normal methodologies and compositional techniques when you work with new media and with performers that have some sort of magistry behind, or sort of, let's say, virtuosism. So we'll talk about this, how to extract what they call the DNA of the best performers you can find. So before we go any further, if this works, I would like to play you just an excerpt of how the piece sounds like, how the instrument sounds like that we have here, and including the instrument and electronics. So you probably realize that the electronic part is pretty much the same as the instruments. So sometimes it's quite hard to figure out what is what. And that's the idea of the piece. It was quite difficult to go too far beyond the sounds and the idioms of the instrument for me. So it was not like any other piece that you will just get some recordings and then transform them and put them together. It was more like trying to create a mirror of the instrument itself. But who is behind this composition and this project? So first of all, we'll talk just very briefly about myself. So I work in areas of composition, combining interactive media, and working with some of the projects you presented yesterday with areas of metadata associated to sound, so that you can retrieve sounds for in real time for your composition. I also serve as my academic service nowadays is at the Manchester University, a place called Novars Research Center. I've been doing that for the last 6-7 years. And before that, I had a position at the Sonic Art Research Center. I think Pedro is also here as well, where I also studied a master's in composition, electroacoustic composition, and did a PhD under the supervision of Michael Arcon, who is the director of the SARC Institute. Before that, I also studied music in Spain, but also did a degree in economics. So as you will see, there's a little bit of swift. So moving from industry and something that has nothing to do with a more creative territory. So there's no reason why people just having different backgrounds cannot get into artistic territories, especially in these faculties where engineering and artists get together. So in terms of, I quite like the idea of working towards projects. So I've been working with large number of groups involved in projects that last for 3-4 years. For example, the Microbial Ensemble, the Carchofa Electric Band, the Tornado Project, the Drosophila Tour, Sonic Expedition to Vietnam, the Slow Project, Locative Audio Project, and recently more in the last year or so with Sonic Pathfinder. I also do some entrepreneur work. So in 2010, with some colleagues, I created a limited guarantee company in UK where we do a little bit of festivals and organize events that cross disciplines outside the university. But it's also informed very much the things I do at the university and vice versa. And during my research leaves, some other times, I've been taking the opportunity to just go places and meet other cultures, meet other people, work in other laboratories, and it's something I very much encourage you to do. So I've been at the Cunitachi College in Mexico, at the Morelia, Conservatory of Morelia, Valencia at the Lea Labs, Technical University of Berlin, NK in Berlin as well, so on and so forth. So in 2010, I started an independent lab in Berlin as well with two more colleagues, and I quite like the idea of working as an independent musician to combine things that perhaps do not have to respond to some other artistic or academic directions that you might have to do while working for other institutions. Then I also been working in social networks, administrating a few accounts with quite a few people involved. So yes, but primarily I feel myself as a composer, someone that writes music using electronics. So Michael, this is the performer we have the pleasure to have here today. I think it probably is a bit of a redundant to introduce him in Portugal because he is very well known. Most of the percussionists teaching here in Portugal have been his students. Also is a very important musician in Europe. Of course, in my country, in Spain, also is very well known, and we have in common that we both are from Valencia, so sort of a couple of Valencian people just involved here. I will not say much about his curriculum, it's online, part of the M4M website, but he has been working with important groups like Ictus, and also very recently, the last few years, funded Drumming, which are responsible for the Timbila project that we'll be presenting today. So also has been serving academically in conservatoires in Rotterdam, here in Porto, also in Barcelona, and SMUC, so on and so forth. So it was a great privilege to work with one of the finest percussionists for some reason, I don't know why, but whenever I want to find a good percussionist, I always come to Portugal and sort of work with Pedro Carneiro. I remember also Miguel Adquime. So it's a country of that lots of percussionists are very, very talented. So, but we talk about performers, and for me, it has been a huge amount of inspiration to work with some of the best ones. My challenge has always been, what can I do that not any other composer have done in the past? So I work with someone like Horacio Franco is probably one of the most well-known musicians in Mexico at the minute. and is a recorder player, very eccentric, absolutely gorgeous performer. Pedro Carneiro also worked here in the past. Amores Percussion Group in Spain, Contacte group, percussion group. People like Dara Morgan, very good violin player. Spanish brass luring metals, one of the finest ensembles for brass in Spain. And as part of the Tornado project with Elizabeth McNutt and Esther Lamnek, and now more recently with Mikel. What I found in common is that these musicians have something inside that you, as a composer, need to steal, in the good sense. So not just try to collaborate with them, but just to try to get something out of them that they didn't even know that they have inside. And I'm talking about sort of oral thinking. Beyond that, I've also been working with some of the many other performers and composers, performers you can find here. But the big question is, when you work with performers, how do you extract this extra oral ability to deal with sound, this experience of many, many years performing pieces, these sort of memories that they have inside. And the most likely scenario is that if you, for example, work with someone like Dara Morgan, is a very experienced violin performer in the UK, that have worked a lot with people that compose using electronic media. Probably the most likely scenario will be that you meet Dara, they will go to a sort of session of extended techniques and so on and so forth. We play a few phrases, we discuss a little bit this, he'll play different bows and different techniques. So at the end of the day, all the composers working with him will have a sort of similar collection of sound sources. And of course, this is when you start composing the piece. But for me, I've been doing that in the past, and it was not enough. So I started to devise or think about a way to go beyond that. And I looked into a very strange PhD portfolio by Rick Nance at the Montfort University, where he uses oral scores. Oral scores are basically a score that is not written on paper. It's basically something that you put in your ear, and as you listen, you just perform it. So that's a bit questionable in my opinion, because how will you know exactly how to decode that oral information? So we had lengthy discussions about that, but I thought this is a very good idea if you want to get this virtuosi and get something out of them. So I created these scores. For example, in the case of Mikel, I use strange things. So for the score, what I do is just create a soundtrack, and then I leave some empty space, and then another bunch of sonic information, and they have to respond in between. And it could be rhythms, but not necessarily composed with the timbila. In his case, I was using from square push rhythms combined with timbila sounds and crazy things. So we have to respond in that way. With Dara Morgan, I like to record violin pieces by, for example, Arditi, Arvine Arditi, and he was like, I can play faster, and I can do it better, and I can play louder, and I can. So it was, in a way, you have to stimulate the performer to get something out of him. Once you get these recordings, I probably can jump to the very last slide, because this is the way I conceive the process. You get the oral score, you get the responses from the performer, get rid of the oral score, and then do your oral scanner. So you have these 2-3 hours of responses to a certain stimuli, an oral stimuli, and then you just go through it and start chopping it. I say, I like this, I don't know why exactly, but I like this, I like that. And this is what I call the DNA of the artist. Sometimes they're just playing things that, from symphonies they played before, and you have to sort of play around that. So I classify them according to whatever, gestures or timbre, and then I do my transformations. So once I have this material, I start composing the piece. So I could spend quite a few amount of days or months just working with that before I start composing. Just to give you a sense of how the session with Mikel went, I just play you a little bit of the sound. This is one of the soundtracks he had to respond to. square pushing. And maybe I give them like 1, 2, 3, 2 instructions at the most, like react against, or respond, imitate, things like that. So it's not just play whatever you like, but some instructions. But the sort of material, for example, with Miquel, I found is things that I actually stole and incorporated into the piece as they were. For example, okay, you hear that before when I play the excerpt. Okay, riffs, rolling effects, different mallet sounds, melodies probably taken from his kind of oral memory. Sometimes I identify pieces that they play. This is from a different instrument. This is the chikulu. This is the bass. Amazing instrument. Chords. Strokes. The membrane, this is something we discovered that is normally not used by the choppy people, which is to use the membrane. Maybe Miguel can do a demonstration after the performance, but there are some upper shells, like resonators, underneath each of the keys that have a membrane in front, so that it can sort of sound like, in the past they used to be bat wings, but they are no longer, they're quite difficult to find, so they started to put plastic, and put the plastic with some sort of a tie. So if you use that, you put the hands in front of it, you can use that as a wah-wah effect, as a wah-wah pedal. And I remember having this conversation with Miquel. He said, well, the choppy people don't normally do that, but if they will know, they happen to know about it, they might be willing to use it in the future. So it's this idea of discovering the instrument and exploring it. And then a sort of scale, I just sample scale. So each of the... I will distribute the score afterwards when we play the piece, so you will see more or less how the instrument is tuned. It's a sort of in flat scale. But the interesting thing is that each instrument is slightly different. So they are not perfectly tuned. So some of them are tuned in a way, some others are not. And it's not just the sound of the pitch. I think the beauty of this instrument is how the instrument resonates. Perhaps Miquel can tell you more about the instrument itself, but when they were tuning it, they were more concerned about the timer of the instrument than the pitch itself. So I think it's something that in Western music we don't really get that quickly. Okay. So going back to the presentation, okay, so then there's another big area, which is the idea of creating context. I think we are lucky enough if you just, return the piece when the piece is due. So when you have a deadline to it. So imagine that you have to create a project surrounding it. I think there's something about composing and creating context for a piece, because then you sort of going beyond your actual responsibilities as a composer, but it makes sense sometimes in the context of some pieces, and the value of the piece has an added value because it's part of a collaboration, or it's part of a collection of pieces that try to maybe explore the idea of two instruments that haven't been played before from different perspectives. So the overall project itself has a supra value, a sort of higher value than the pieces composed for it. But if I have a look at sort of definitions of context, in not musical forms, but in general, for example, I found a couple of interesting ones that say the context are the relevant constraints of the communicative situation that influence language use, language variation, and discourse. Summary. Or in the circumstances that form the setting of an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So we can better understand something if we give a context to it. The perfect example is just the program notes. You give a program notes and people can sort of figure out what is the piece all about. But some people don't want to give program notes, and there's a reason for that. Some pieces are abstract enough that you don't need a context to experience them. But it may apply also to social context. So the circumstances under which the creative work was made, including its function, purpose, use, time, the creator, and the recipient. So in this case, for composing for such a interesting instrument, it was just impossible to ignore the context. So then I was asking myself why, after a few years, I have this will or this need to create context to compose pieces. And I wonder why, because it's very laborious and sometimes it just slows down the whole process. And I have 4 quick examples I'm going to go through, with maybe 1 or 2 slides each. So Russian disco, which are part of the Tornado project. Some of you might be familiar with the Slow project, so it's not in Berlin. Located about the project and the Timbila project, which I didn't do, I just got on board thanks to Mikel, but has already 4 pieces composed, and hopefully we'll take it to another level. So the Tornado project was a commissioned number of pieces for clarinet and flute for Esther Lanek and Elizabeth Magnot, that live in the States, but in two very different places. One lives in New York, the other one lives in North Texas. So it was a very stupid idea to try to get these 2 performers together because it was just too much trouble. But they just happened to like the idea. It took lots of effort, but we managed to get a bunch of composers interested in it. Mara Helmut, Russell Pinkston, Robert Rose, here actually, Andrew Mayer, Paul Wilson, Eric Lyon, and myself. So we composed pieces that when I've been listening to the master of the works we did this year, I just couldn't believe that each of us has such a different perspective about the work itself. So flute and clarinet are not, with computer, they don't really have a clear repertoire. So it was probably the first attempt to create a repertoire, maybe because the dynamics of the instrument, the balance is not very adequate. And then you need electronics to sort of balance out the dynamics of a clarinet with a flute. But what was more striking is to see the compositional approach of this composer. So it was not just about thinking about my piece. My piece was fine, but it was just one piece among many. The idea was that the project will showcase, and someone in the future will be maybe edited in a form of a CD or something, and in the future people could say, there's a good reference about pieces for flute and clarinet, and this is the Tornado project. And beyond that, we happen to have lots of performances. Sometimes, some pieces in the repertoire, sometimes the whole concert. So it was quite an experience to have this full concert organized in places, rather than just going to a place, playing your piece, bowing everybody, and just going just for a beer. So the second one, I was involved as a project manager. It was something I did with a group of 5. It's this Slow project, and the idea was pretty much to do with the context of the European questions we were all asking. So we were asking 34 artists to come to Berlin for 6 weeks and explore the idea of slow as a concept and low. And there were a bunch of people from very different disciplines, as you can see here, from environmental artists, digital artists, filmmakers, composers, engineers, physical scientists, and so on. And we were not telling them what the outcome might be. We were just saying, listen, this is the two questions we are addressing. We want to address. How would you do it? So we have a combination of panels, discussions, performances, workshops, and it was all documented with 42 hours of internet materials that we were putting every week so that people could respond to it. And we created a Facebook account. There were like 5,000 people join it very quickly. And then we, as a result of passing the camera, we created a documentary film called Slow, VIP. How is the title is? VIP launches are for all. And it was a matter of just not creating a film. It's not conducted. The film is not directed by anyone. It's just a camera that is passing by and it's just documenting the film. So the film can be played dynamically, just selecting. You go to an installation and just play dynamically some of the excerpts of things that two people selected for that particular film. So it's another way to revisit through a sort of mosaic form an event. And this case is even slightly different because I don't even have a piece in that project. My piece is the project. I can say that. Okay, and then the last year I worked on two different projects. One of them is the one we are sort of discussing today, and the other one, in terms of context, is called 5. And 5 is an interactive media work for using locative audio technologies, and it's basically a game that you play in a room, so it uses Blender and so on, and then you can interact with an environment. And the environment is based on the Circuito Perifónico of Valencia, which is a set of speakers that in 1939 Franco decided to, after the Spanish Civil War, decided to put in the city to communicate to civilians what to do, where to go, what sort of things should be done, and so on. It was kind of radios were confiscated, and there was no other way to get to the public, but just to go through these speakers around the city. So we were very lucky, in collaboration with the university, Polytechnic University, and the team with Miguel Molina, to access the original archive of that particular engineer, Valdelomar, who actually ran the broadcasting station that was controlling the 35 speakers. And in between this information from the regime, they were playing music, they were sort of putting advertisement and everything. So we got a collection of records. And then we asked 40 composers to just reinvent the periphonic circuit. So we'll go on the streets with the same itinerary, and people might be able to hear them using locative audio tools in collaboration with a group called Notours. So you basically put your headphones on, and then somebody's telling you a story about what happened in 1939 with the eyes and the ears of someone in the 20s and 30s, just responding to a completely different situation than the one they had at the time. And the files are triggered as you walk. It's sort of a satellite pointing to your GPS position and just triggering them. But the connection with my piece in that context is that the elements, you can see it here. So this is the original periphonic circuit, and the speakers in town, 35 of them. And the connection is that this is the game. The characters in the game actually moving there are these people walking on the streets. So they are not aware of that, but they are controlling the movement of the items and the assets in the game. So the game is your locative game where you listen to some of this, it's using the same archive, but it's quite interesting because as you get close to these speakers that move, you hear what this guy is hearing at the same time. And in the art gallery in town, in Vallorty, we have these displays just with the walk that people could hear and see people just walking. And if you click on the screen, you could hear what they were listening to. So that's a very important, very interesting context. Within that context, you create your own context and reinvent the context and involve 40 composers to write the piece. We organized also a symposium in collaboration with the university to discuss this idea of locative audio tools, inviting people from geography and other disciplines. And this particular project, the locative audio this year, was run in 11 different cities. So we had 11 different walks walking at the same time in 11 different cities. So you could just click there and then change the city and hear what people in Tampere in Finland were listening, or in Vietnam were listening at the time, and be able to create a collage of sounds, stories that will make maybe little sense, but it's sort of interactive experience. So why to get into troubles and create context within context? I don't have an answer to that really, but going back to the Timbila project, when Mikel told me about these Timbilas they had been rescuing from Mozambique, just inviting people to come and perform, and they sort of buying a few of the instruments, I said, the context is already there, it's just absolutely fantastic. But what might be my contribution beyond just writing a piece for that particular instrument and performing it a couple of times and so on? So I thought about the idea of creating the virtual instruments that could be performed in the future or used for composers to perform these pieces without having the instrument. So one of the main ideas, correct me if I'm wrong, Mikel, but it was to preserve and reinvent the culture of the Chopi people. Mozambique, as you probably know, was suffered from a couple of decades of civil war after the independence from Portuguese, or Portugal as a colony in the mid-70s, I think it was 74. So the country struggled to just recover themselves, not just artistically, but in every sense. So most of the Timbila players went to South Africa to play in the mines, and they preserved the tradition doing that. But the idea of the project was to say, well, maybe Western composers can do something about it. Maybe not just taking on board some of the traditions, but maybe reinventing the language, creating new repertoire. And I said, well, one of the problems is the instruments themselves. So why not to create virtual versions of that? So I have a small demo to do in a minute, including some of the 3D models, but the 3D models are going to be created by two collaborators that we just got on board and will be visiting us in Porto in a couple of weeks. That are Manu Samuel Sika, an architect Elena Merasova, and graphic designer Manuel Ferrer, also both based at the Polytechnic University of Valencia. So it's a sort of team of people from Valencia working in this project. And the idea is that the context of the Timbila project, the Timbila performance is normally an orchestral performance. So they have all these sort of different voices of the Timbila family, and they're played as large orchestral forces like the bass and the sort of 10-key instruments, 18 and 19 and so on. So the idea will be that, for example, you might be able to compose thinking about these larger scale orchestral forces by using just a single instrument and maybe projecting the other two on the sides, the bass there and the 10-key instrument here, and perform them using maybe the Kinect or improvising with it. And the second idea is that you might be able, if I can just show you one of the simple, maybe let's start with the this is a sort of mock 3D model, physical model of the instrument, where it has no framework, it's just the keys, just to sort of say. But for example, you can just call a bar and then maybe just play it. I will play exactly the same as this is a real sample. I mean, you can do that with the Kinect, but probably it's probably the same. And I can call other have different hardness, or even the stick. Let me do that again. Sorry. So in a way, it's quite easy to recreate the entire collection of mallets they might have and play exactly as the timbila as it sounds. But the idea from a compositional point of view was to also try to recreate this kind of DNA we were discussing before of Miquel in the instrument. So for example, this has slightly different sounds. Let me see. If I play this side of the instrument, the thing's pretty much the same. Sorry. Here's the same. But if I go to this side of the instrument, it's more gestural. So it's freezed timbres. This one is not working fine. Sound, or even gestures like this one. And you can do things that you might not be able to do with a normal instrument, which is to have a kind of clusters of Okay, so that's the idea. The architects are going to just create the physical models, the 3D virtual versions at professional levels, so scaling them down and taking pictures, mapping and UV mapping with exactly the same materials and the skin of the timbilas. And then we will apply the physical, also the physical sounds and the transformed sounds that we can provide this as a tool for composers to create their own pieces, combining acoustic instruments, virtual instruments, and fixed media or live interactive sounds. So I would like to invite now Miquel just to talk a little bit about the background of the project, if you want. So you will excuse the simplification of the entire story, but I don't know. Is this Portuguese or English? Or?
Miguel, se preferir, eu posso traduzir para inglês. Okay, in English?
Here, there's a microphone here, so you want to come to this side? Because there were four pieces in total. You have premiered 14 billion already.
Yes. Well, this started 7 years ago, I think. I met Machume, who before was a photo here.
Yeah, Machume Sango.
He was playing in Brussels. I work also in Brussels. He was doing a project with dance in Compañía Nacional de Bailado de Mozambique. They were in Brussels and they was interacting with ethnic music from Mozambique, but doing contemporary dance. And they came to Brussels, which the company Rosas and Parch, the school Parch of dance, was part of the project to collaborate also with them, and they was there in residence. So I met Machume and two more timbila players who was doing the music for this dance. And I knew that the instrument in that moment. In fact, I knew it before because Hugh Tracy, I don't know if you know, was a ethnomusicologist, English ethnomusicologist who was in South Africa. He already did many research in this instrument, in this kind of music in Mozambique, back in the 50s, I think, very long time ago. And I already saw sometimes videos he was recording and recordings of CDs, etc. And then when 7 years ago came back this crossing again with this instrument, I got interest because in that moment I was already involved with Portugal and I could speak Portuguese with the players, and I started to be interested also because the relation between both countries. Later I had the chance to go to Mozambique 4 times, not because this project, but another project also helping in the music side, trying to reconstruct the music school who was in Maputo, who becomes almost lost. I was trying together with Music Fund to activate this school. And when I was there, I was taking the time to go to investigate, to go where the Timbila becomes, which is like 500 kilometers north Maputo. I went there to meet the big master, who's Venancio Mbabe. And also in Maputo is many players who went to Maputo. It was a big immigration to Maputo. So I start to meet people and players and start to play a little bit and buy instruments. Machume comes a lot to Europe, and each time I was there I brought one instrument and I was telling Machume to buy the instrument. Each time he comes, plays with this instrument, and after he stays here and I bring it to Portugal. So little by little we got the orchestra. I might say that the instrument, it works in orchestra. It's not they can play solo now. They play in many ways, many different forms. But in the culture, in the traditional culture, it is a part of one orchestra, which they think is similarity with the gamelan music from Indonesia. It seems it had been connection long time ago, and the Africans imitated the gamelan, creating the big instruments, the ones you saw a little bit there, which is a big bass, creating like bass, baritone, tenors, sopranos. So they got all different kind of tessitures, and they normally play with dance and with some ritual things very much.
I have a sample video of the one you presented in Manchester. Should
Yes.
I just play for a minute?
Yes.
You can have a sense of how the instrument sounds like. Who is this chap?
He's the son of the constructor of the Timbilas. this man is who built the instruments. It's
It's a video of a video, so the
Venancio.
quality is not very good.
yeah.
Because it's just filming on top of
Yeah, I
it.
was filming this there. This when I went to pick up some of the instruments. This is the way they were showing me it works, the instrument. So.
And this is Matsume, isn't it?
And this is Matsume. Yeah, here inside is a player I met in Brussels, and later he came many times in Portugal, and he was our teacher also to learn. We learn a little bit the traditional music, and then with the group which I formed here is drumming percussion group from Porto. I have here a dossier after somebody wants to see. We start to buy these instruments. You can see this is the part of this kind of projects. We have Matsume playing with us, and we bought the instruments, but I didn't want to play. I wanted to play a little bit. We learn a little bit to know the language, to know the way it works in the traditional music. But I know it will be quite difficult to play as they do, because they learn this in their family since they are childs. So we start to play a small repertoire of traditional music, but I wanted to do something else with the instrument, since this orchestra is here and our context is totally different. So it appears the idea, and it appears also the possibilities. The drumming had support from the government in in 2002 until 2010, and with this support we start to commissioning composers and showing them how it works in traditional, but also how the instrument it is physically and sounding, analyzing them, what's the tuning. Is a different tuning of the occidental tuning we have, the temperate. And I asked the composers, in this case 4 composers up to now, to write, to rethink, and to find how they imagine to create a piece for the orchestra. So we have 4 composers. Ricardo Climent he is the only who composed solo. Then it was a composer from Africa, but he is living in Brussels. Is a friend who he himself is composer and violinist, and he composed a concerto for violin and orchestra of timbilas. And himself, he achieved to tuning in the same way that we do. So he learned the positions of the timbila, and he amplified, because this is quite strong when we play all the orchestra, and distortioned, which came to match with the distortion the instrument itself have. This is one of the pieces. He also composed a duo for him and for me, but this duo we play only a couple of times in Maputo, and then he said he doesn't want to play, but now he's saying he may be going to rearrange it. Then another composer is a Spanish composer who is related with African music also, is Polo Vallejo. He is an ethnomusicologist also, more specialist in Tanzania, but he knew it also, this culture, and he wrote another piece. And the other composers is Jean-Luc Favchank, is also a composer from Belgium, and he composed also a big piece for 17 villas. So, and that's it, and we have more or less a complete concert of new music written for that instrument, which is not, it comes not directly from the background of where it appears, that instrument.
And it is my understanding that I'm not the only composer who struggled to write this piece. Is that right? That they have serious difficulties to complete the piece because of the... So why do you think all the composers at some point just were about to say, well, I can't write this instrument?
Well, the instrument is difficult because we are accustomed to use the 12 notes, no, the tonality, the modality also. And here you don't have it. You have only 7. It works with 7 notes, which is not exactly of ours, but it is in octave. With this we can find. So they have in a struggle that they cannot modulate, and this is a big problem when we bass even with the decaphonic. You need sometimes to jump something, and here you cannot jump. This is a big problem.
But it's also the idiom, but also the culture behind it. I mean, it's quite difficult to write a piece for an instrument that has such a strong heritage.
Yes.
And ignore it. Just to say, well, there's still the sounds, but what about, if at some point the choppy people happen to listen to these pieces,
yeah. Well,
it's a lot of respect, isn't it?
Yes, it all, as every instrument which has a long history, it match with something, with the history, with the people who are listening to, with the people who plays, and this becomes one unity, and in one time and one place. So we are taken off, and when we are in a way, but I think the today happens with many ways. Many African cultures are getting lost only because they are changing the costumes. Now it's very easy to have radios. The people they start to play guitar and they don't want to play this because they have guitars and they have small synthesizers, and so this is changing completely the relation with their culture. So in one way we also, I'm doing something totally different, but I wanted to preserve something, and if we can say this, they also trying to do it. Machume is very much involved, but he fusioned it with, let's say, more guitars and electric, more in the, I won't say commercial, but more in the pop, electronic music. And I wanted to come to the roots, to go farther, to jump, not go in the last 20 years, but go farther back how it was, the music they wrote it a long time ago. So the only things Machume show us is the old music he knew, but he almost don't use it. And his uncle, which is Venancio, who wrote, he still is the master. He's 78 or something, but he's still playing, and he knows very well this. So I'm more interested in this kind of music, which is no mix, because the mix tends to sounds equal. Now we mixed many kind of music. Many people does this, Indian music and Hindu music and Japanese, and they mix many times. They mix it to try to show many people in many festivals of world music. But everybody put a drum set, everybody put a bass, a guitar bass, and this for me is equalizing too much the diversity of the world we have. So I wanted to keep the authenticity of the instrument, and immediately touching in the let's say in the sharp of the future thing, the people who are creating things and they are inventing things. So to put this old and these very new things together, we saw passing this middle field of connecting through other ways.
And yesterday I was quite lucky to be involved in some of the presentations by PhD students here. One of them was investigating actually rhythms and a way to create rhythm, or more complex polyrhythms. And this particular instrument is actually one of the most complex African music you can find in terms of harmony and polyrhythms. So I see this as an opportunity for, it's just one example, but there could be many more, for PhD students to say, listen, you have these fantastic resources here in Porto, why not to try to leave the computers and be away from the keyboard, as you say, and maybe talk to people like Mikel and Matsume, I guess, and try to investigate more within the culture what sort of rhythms can be explored and maybe identified that your computer systems can do. So they get the research closer to something which is part of your country, about the identity of the relationships between Portugal
and Mozambique.
and
Yes.
Mozambique. So
Yeah, the instrument already, the first when the discoverment was doing, the first Portuguese already was relating they got impressive from the players, and back in the 70th century, you got some reference to it already. Mostly was the how you call the religious people who went there, and they have more time, and they just wrote letters to here, and wrote it's trying to explain what they was seeing there in that contact, in that cultural contact. So this is already something that it is the Portuguese was already knowing long time ago.
So I have a question for you, Mikel, if I can. And we didn't plan this before. So if you happen to take this project, this concept of 5 pieces, to Maputo and play in front of someone that have lived this culture within, the family and so on, what do you think might be the reaction?
I don't know. We have to see it. I don't know. Machume knows because he is more involved in Europe, and I already sent some parts of your piece. And
How did you?
yes.
Did he like it?
Yes. He knows more. He is more accustomed, but I don't know. I would like to know the older people, which comes from very traditional, and also they have in Zavala. They have a festival every year, which all the village come together. Every village have his band of Timbila, and they come together and they show each other. So, and it's like one weekend, all day playing, not all night, but they meet there, and they are 2 days playing almost all day from 10 in the morning to 10 in the night. And they get together, sometimes even they mix. I might say that the instrument before each village had a different tuning. Every village does the tuning, have their own construction, and they do it in the way they like. Even sometimes they mix pieces. They play sometimes same pieces, sometimes they have their own pieces. But they have the same pieces, they play it in a slightly different tuning because they say this is for them the way it should be. But now they change this. Now everybody decide that Venancio was the most known international player, and also the best constructor. I think is the best constructor of instruments. I got his timbilas, but also everybody decided to tune it in the way he was tuning. So now all the bands play in this, and this becomes after this festival because they didn't want to transport everybody his own instruments. So they say, well, 1 year one band brings the instruments and everybody can play in the same instruments. So now all the village, which is not too much. I think I asked Venancio, he told me he knows like 20 bands, 18, 20 bands existing now. It was much more before. Even in one moment, the national hymn,
Anthem.
Eh?
Himno nacional.
Anthem. Anthem was with Timbila in one moment, and when the politics went there, in the airport was the band of Timbila having the welcome to the people coming to the country. But now change. Now this change. Sometimes they do also. They do a representation of what they have there, but they also have with band.
Okay. Maybe we should play the piece.
Yes.
See if you like it.